going to cut this part of the should I? I'm not kidding.
I honestly, I hadn't even really talked about it with my husband that much. And so I was just like, okay,
Yeah.
great.
That never goes over well.
He was like, all right, good choice. I got a letter the other day from somebody, somebody mailed me a letter. Like they took time to find my office address and mail me a letter, which was about how basically stop talking.
Get out of here.
It was just there were some people, he was like, you're not supposed to promote your stuff. There was a guy who was like,
hello and welcome back to Redirected. My name is Andrew East, and I think we can all agree that life is full of unexpected events. For better or for worse, things don't usually turn out how we think they will. And so I wanted to sit down with some people who have experienced some huge unexpected events and made it through to the other side in hopes that I could glean some wisdom for myself and share that with you, because we all go through unexpected events. It's how we make it through those that determines what's next for us. And today I couldn't be more honored that Professor Emily Oster decided to join us. Dr. Oster got her PhD from Harvard, and she's an economist who deals with health-related issues. She's written 2 books, including Expecting Better and Cribsheet. In her first book called Expecting Better, Dr. Oster walks us through all the studies related to pregnancy and the decisions that a mom has to make. So can I drink coffee? Should I be on bed rest? Can I exercise? In hopes to give people a more informed way to make decisions. And then in Cribsheet, she talks us through the early years of raising a child. So can I sleep with the child on my bed? Should I sleep train them? All these different issues, and there's a million different decisions. And so I really appreciate Dr. Oster's way of approaching this problem and all these different decisions with data-based studies. And whether you agree with her or not, Dr. Oster is very approachable and understanding. She's not overbearing with her recommendations. And so I'm really excited to share this interview with you guys, where she walks us through how she got into this and then the different results and surprising things that she came across. I am so excited to be sharing this interview with you because it's so relevant in my life right now. One, because Shawn and I are having a child in October, and for a lot of people, having a child is the biggest redirection or pivot moment in life. So without further ado, I'm gonna jump into this episode with Dr. Oster. Can't wait to hear her feedback, and let's get going.
Emily, do I call you doctor? Do I call you professor? What do you go by?
Emily is great.
Are you sure?
Great. Yeah, Emily is great.
And I just want to say right off the bat that I'm terrified to be a parent, and I'm thankful to be talking to you because I think you got some tips for me and any other future parents out there. So
I have some tips, although I'm sure you will be a great parent with or without tips.
So this show is all about people who have had interesting career pivots. Everybody ultimately does in their career. We're going to get to that, but I want to hear about your upbringing. Apparently you're you're a legend.
I'm not sure. Okay. So, that's quite, yeah. So my parents were professors, and I grew up in Connecticut. And I think the thing you are talking about is that when I was a little kid, I used to talk to myself in my crib, which I actually want to say is super common.
Okay.
So a lot of kids talk to themselves. You may learn this when your kid is 2. A lot of kids talk to themselves before they go to sleep. But most people's parents are pretty regular, respectful people who just let them talk to themselves, and then that's it. But my parents put a tape recorder under my bed at the request of some researchers. And so then there's this whole corpus of tapes of me talking to myself and all the different stuff that I would say, which is mostly super uninteresting. But then some people had written a book about how kids' language develops based on these things. So that was that's a little piece of what my childhood was like.
Well, so I don't know if you did the story justice. Apparently your speech was way more complex than what it would have been for other people your age, right?
Yeah, I talked early. I talked a lot.
Okay.
I talked a lot and early, yeah. But
Right.
But I think to be fair, the whole book, there's this book written about this, but the book isn't it amazing that this person talked so early? The book is isn't it interesting that, the knowledge of the future develops before knowledge of the past or whatever. It's a book about language development, and not at all about, it's it's telling, I've never read the book. Even though it is about me,
Okay.
I have never made it through the book. So
Interesting. Okay, good to know. Well, thank you for giving background on that.
Yeah, there's the background.
So your parents were economists too, is that right?
Yes, my parents were economists also, both of them, and my husband is an economist. So we've really got it kind of coming out of the years. Yeah.
How did you get into what you're doing?
So, I kind of knew what being an economist was because that was my parents' job. And I think
Right.
for a lot of people, it's like, that's not like a job like doctor where you're like, oh, I know about that, but I knew about it. And then I was always super interested in kind of research and academics and trying to learn new facts about the world. And so when I was in college, I kind of bobbed around a little bit, but basically gravitated towards doing economics. And I don't know, it's like, I mean, you're the one with the podcast about like how people get to where they're going. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, here I
am. Nice. Okay. So you got your PhD from Harvard.
Yes.
And then did you teach at the University of Chicago's business school?
I did. Yeah. I was at the University of Chicago's business school for 8 years or something. And then I came to Brown.
Wow. And were you doing similar work when you were in Chicago?
Yeah, I mean, so my research is mostly about health. So I'm kind of interested in how people make health decisions, and in particular, the times that they make decisions that are not, we think would be like not the best decisions.
Right.
And so I've been working on that for a long time. I was doing that in Chicago. I do that here. So it's the same kind of thing.
Wow. Very cool. So I was listening to your TED Talk, and it's titled, "What Do We Really Know About the Spread of AIDS?" And that was in 2007. Do I have that correct?
That was, yeah.
Can you talk to us about that, what your topic was, but also the experience of doing TED Talk?
So my talk was about some research that I had done, actually a few different pieces of research about kind of how we understand the HIV epidemic in Africa, which at the time, this was sort of before there were a lot of access to treatment in Africa. And so the epidemic was more of a death sentence. And so my research was about kind of understanding why people would make would undergo, like, would have sex without a condom, even in the face of this deadly disease, and just trying to think about that behavior and trying to understand it through the lens of saying, maybe it's because the other risks of death are really high, and so the kind of incentive to avoid this is lower. So sort of digging into some of the behavioral economics of that experience, or that kind of policy question. In terms of giving a TED Talk, I have to say, like, I actually know some people who have given TED Talks more recently, now that TED is like this huge thing. And they said, like, you go and they make you practice and they like make you like do all this stuff and like make sure it's really good and like all this stuff. When I did it, it was just like, they were just like, okay, here's your headphones. Like, nobody even asked me. Nobody asked me what I was going to say. They're just like, good luck. You have the timer is up there. Like I told them the title and like, that was it. There was no curation of any sort. And what it meant was like so I went to this conference, and of course the conference, it was amazing. There were all kinds of like super interesting people, but like some of the talks were like awful. Really? Right? Like some of the talks like were so bad that like the guy, Chris Anderson, got up on the stage and was like, basically like, stop talking.
Get out of here.
It was just like, there were some people, he was like, you're not supposed to promote your stuff. There was a guy who was like promoting his stuff, and Chris Anderson was just like, you have to get off the stage now. So it was just like a totally different thing than it is now. I don't know. It was like super interesting.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So you wrote your first book about parenting, Expecting Better. Was that in 2014?
So the book came out in 2013, I think.
Okay. Yeah. After you had been pregnant.
Yes. My older kid was born in 2011. So I kind of sold the book when I was like 35 weeks pregnant, and I wrote it kind of in the first year.
Oh my gosh.
So
again, the show's kind of about interesting career pivots. And I feel like based off, what I came across in research, that might've been a pivotal moment for you. Yeah. Having put out your first book is huge, but also there's so much, honestly, hate out there that was a result of that book. Can you tell us about the book itself and why you wanted to write it? What your just kind of do a summary of what Expecting Better is?
Yeah. So So I got pregnant. So this, I guess, was like 2010. And I sort of had this experience that I think kind of a lot of women have, which is that this was my first experience with the medical, like sustained experience with the medical system. And I had a lot of questions. I wanted to make the right choices. But I also wanted to understand a lot of the logic behind some of the things people are told, like you can't have any coffee, or you can only have a little coffee, or, you can't have any alcohol, or you can have a little alcohol, like whatever is the stuff. So I actually ended up, and actually, honestly, for me, like the biggest thing was like prenatal testing. Like the landscape is sort of different than it is now, but like that was like a big sort of an obsession. I like wanted to make the right choice there, and I felt like I didn't get a lot of answers.
Meaning like the blood test of finding out what do you
So this question of, so now they do it with a blood test, but thinking about testing for chromosomal problems
right
in the infant. So now there's like a very good blood test. When I was pregnant for the first time, there was like a choice between something invasive, which was risky, and something which wasn't that informative. And there was like a sort of arbitrary rule about who should get what. And I got just like really like into trying to understand this. And I basically found I was sort of like doing my job in the service of my pregnancy. Like I was like doing all the stuff that I did all day at my job, like we're getting research papers and making spreadsheets and like figuring out what the data said. And so then I did sort of come to think, okay, like there would be like a book, maybe I could write this down for other people. And I like to write. I like to write for audiences that are not academics, which is actually not super common among academics, but anyway, is something that I like. And so then I kind of wrote some pieces of it, and then honestly, like I sent it. I think probably sometimes these pivots are just sort of unexpected. Like I wrote like an introduction, a chapter, and I was like, oh, this was kind of fun. I enjoyed doing this. Like, and I sent it to this person who is now my agent, who was the agent of a friend of mine. And I was like, hey, I don't know if you like think anyone would buy this. And she was like, yes, great. We'll sell it next week. And I was like, okay, and it was just like, I was like, all right, great. And then I was sort of like, oh, I'm like, and I honestly, like I hadn't even really talked about it with my husband that much. And so I was just like, okay, great. Like
that never goes over
like,
well.
He was like, all right, good choices. So, it was a big, it was a big risk. It was a really big change in terms of like what my job was going to be like or how it was going to be perceived. And I'm not sure. I think it ended up being a much bigger deal than I thought that it would be beforehand. Like it was like, it's such an unusual thing to do, to like write a popular book that is about sort of, like I tell people sometimes the book is like a combination of memoir and meta-analysis. Like it's sort of about my pregnancy. It's sort of about, me, but it's also, most of it's just about data and like, what does the evidence really say on these kind of questions? But it's just a really weird thing to do. And I think some people perceived it as a really weird, not always in a super positive way.
It's my most recommended book to other people about this issue, because I've been like so overwhelmed, and I was like doing research on like, hey, how do you be a dad? And what I'm trying to find out is like, what the heck do I need to know so that I can make the right decisions to raise my child? And so I love your book, because if I was going to write one, this would be exactly what I would want to share with the world. I'm curious, what type of people have you found read your books? Is it like a really wide spectrum, or is it like a certain demographic, or what does that look like?
So I think I think it's a certain demographic, but it's not super narrow. So for a while I felt like I'm only going to sell this book to like people who have a PhD in economics, but that turned out not to be right. The audience is broader than that. I mean, I think I tend to appeal to people who are like like evidence, who like want to make choices based on data. So people who are like, you should just do what feels right for you. Like this is not really the book for that group. But I think that probably the demographic skews sort of like higher education than the average population. But
this could be super amateur of me, but I do want to challenge you a little bit on you saying that it's not for people who like just this feels well, because I feel like you do such a good job at doing what other people don't do a good job at, and having caveats or just presenting the platform for opinion and like, hey, this is just what the data said. I just feel like you're welcoming and inviting to so many different things. I also think your honesty in the data and how you analyze that and present it and saying, hey, there's a lot of studies that say that, or on the other hand, there's not a lot of studies, but what those studies do say is X. I think that's incredibly important. And I think just like in general, I wish there was more of the honesty and presenting of data as you did it. So that's why I'm so geeked to talk to you right now, because I just feel like you executed that really well.
Yeah, no, that is great. That was the goal. And so I always wonder if I achieved it, but good.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the pivot for you in the sense that you mentioned you do kind of economics in the health realm, but these books that you've written, Expecting Better and Cribsheet, are both about parenting, which yes, obviously is a lot about health, but has it pigeonholed you to being like you're the parenting expert or like the parenting economist?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I think I have tried to sort of keep my academic world like sort of separate from the books.
Yeah.
And I think that was actually not so hard with the first book because, I published this book and then like I kind of kept writing papers and the first book, has become more successful over time, but wasn't like actually that successful in the first, so not that many people knew about it. I think, so the second book, which is about parenting, I think it was objectively more successful from the get-go. And I think now there's more of a like, okay, I'm like the economist who writes about parenting. But I still do, I like, it is still, my academic work is still kind of pretty separate from this. So like the other thing that I'm doing this week is like preparing a bunch of talks about like methodological issues in like, data analysis, like basically like statistics. And I'm going to talk about those to economists. And so I'm still trying to like be like a regular economist some of the time, but I don't know. It is definitely influenced how I think people perceive my contributions to the world.
Have you embraced that, or is a part of you that resents that? Because so way different worlds. But I don't want, if somebody just says Andrew East is a football player, I like hate that. Like I'm like, no, don't call me just a football player. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I do, and I think I think I try to embrace it, but I think it is the sort of at the end of the day, I feel like I do. I don't know. I feel like I can do a lot of these different things, and I'm not sure it's just being like the parent economist is like a little tricky.
Although wildly important, and this is something that like has appalled me over Shawn's, I guess. I don't do math very well. 6 months pregnant now or something like that. And the amount of passion, or should I say zeal, that people have over how to do that, how to be pregnant and then how to raise your kid. I mean, we put a lot of our life on social media. So we I guess warrant it to a certain extent, but the amount of unsolicited advice that we've gotten or criticism that we've gotten is just wild,
Yeah. No, people really feel like you want to know what they think about your thing. You're pregnant. Like they think you need to know that. It's like,
oh my God.
It's like, I don't know. I didn't need to know that. I mean, people, this is a thing. It's not just about like, I got a letter the other day from somebody, like somebody mailed me a letter. Like they took time to find my office address and mail me a letter, which was about how on a podcast they had listened to, I kept saying data is rather than data are.
No.
And they found it impossible to listen to the podcast because of this error. And I was just like, all right, thanks for taking the time.
Oh my gosh. But I mean, to their credit, that is something that kind of, I struggle with data is, data are.
It turns out both of them are fine. I think the new thing is they're both fine.
I got you. Good to know. That's funny. So is there any other topic besides parenting that is like this, and as far as public opinion and how people express themselves? I think it's so unique in that people have this vast attachment to it. And you talk about it in Cribsheet, people wanting to, obviously raising a child is like, to a lot of people, the pinnacle of life. But you talk about this avoiding cognitive dissonance. And so like, if I raise my kid, if my kid sleeps on his stomach, then I think that's the way everybody should raise their kid, on their stomach, because I'm trying to justify my decision. it's just such an interesting mix of everything that makes this such a unique topic, you know?
Yeah. No. And I think that is a big piece for parenting is kind of, you just so want your decisions to be right, that you kind of want them to be right for everybody, because that's how you know that they're like super right. And, and I mean, I'm not sure where else. I think this comes up in some other like personal choices. Like people sometimes talk about their diets like this, and people, as you just talk about food, like people who are into like, particularly if you're into kind of like weird, like I don't like weird
the
kind of
keto
diets,
diet, the keto diet,
like the keto diet,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Paleo diet, like, it's like, and people kind of get into like, things like, sort of things you're doing where it's like costly to do it. And like, it's kind of like, you're like eating all these like meat sticks, you don't want people to be like any diet, like any diet's fine. Like I'm eating these like weird, you want that to be right if you're eating meat sticks.
Can you talk about in Expecting Better, what some surprising findings were for you personally?
Yeah. I mean, I think the one that like kind of really I found very surprising was this stuff about bed rest, which I still sort of comes up a lot for like a lot of pregnant people are put on bed rest. And it turns out that's like a terrible idea. And there's like nothing for which that's something good. So that's a sort of like, that's not in the like lifestyle space, but it is, I think it's something that impacts a lot of people for no reason.
Right.
And I had sort of assumed that like, okay, there, maybe it's not everything, maybe it's not useful for everything, but that like, there's a bunch of things where that's a good idea, but actually like, no, there's no things basically for which that's a good idea.
Very interesting.
So
were there any topics that created the most outlash or criticism of the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's absolutely no question that the discussion of alcohol was the like focal point for a lot of the backlash. And so, I mean, so I can tell you what I say about that in the book, which is that I sort of go through like a bunch of many studies, most of which are from Europe, which are like around the question of like, is it okay to occasionally have a glass of wine while you're pregnant or drink of some sort, and basically argue that in all of those studies where people are drinking occasionally, there is no evidence of negative impacts on the kids in the data, which of course doesn't mean that everybody should drink during their pregnancy. I mean, people make different choices about this, but that, they're the kind of evidence that suggests that you should not drink a lot, which is very strong, does not immediately follow into the sort of occasional drinking space. Not everybody was very happy with that discussion.
And this is, we mentioned, I mentioned you're inviting to so many different opinions, and in Cribsheet, you have a whole paragraph on preferences, and you say preferences are important. Two families with the same food cost, the same value of time, the same options may make different choices because they have different preferences. And that's what I just think the backlash from something like that, where it's not like you're telling people to drink alcohol.
Right. Which is how people are like, this is the book. This book tells people, it's like, no, that is not what this is about. It's about, and showing people what the evidence is. And I think that in that space, there was sort of some pushback saying like, well, people telling me like, we shouldn't show people the evidence on this because, what if we tell them it's okay to have one drink, then, maybe like women will like just have 5 drinks. And, it'd be better to tell them to have nothing. Although, I think that's also a little complicated because if you tell people to have nothing and then they have one and they're like, well, as long as I had one, I might as well have 5 because it's all the same, then that's also not good.
Right.
I also think there's a sense in which like, pregnant women are still people. And, I think most people, if you tell people you can have one, like, why are we assuming that these women are not going to be able to like, have this kind of self-control? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's kind of it's almost like the Matrix red pill, blue pill. Like, oh, don't tell them because they're not mature enough to deal with it.
To deal with this, yeah. I mean, it's part of the sort of general like infantilization of pregnancy.
So yeah, that's a good way to put it. This is I just, again, I'm just hyping up your work. You guys listening who haven't read Cribsheet or Expecting Better, I would highly recommend it. I found so much encouragement in it because we've never had a kid. there's so many things that you do on a daily basis where it's like, oh shoot, I just ate a red fish or a white fish, or I had X amount of red meat this week. And you're like, you can get so caught up in, is that the right decision? Do we just screw up our kid? Honestly, even with the data, there's a lot of different ways to go about it. And there's a lot of ways to raise a healthy kid.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, in some ways, that's even more true in the parenting. Like, I mean, that's true. Of course, it's true in the pregnancy, but I think these kind of things come up all the time in parenting where, like, you know, you'll find out once you have the kid, like there's many ways that you can feel like you're messing up. And every moment there's like another thing where you're like, oh, if I don't like give them the this kind of flashcards, or like, what if all the toys, what if I don't have only the wooden toys, you know, it's like, and then it's like, it's fine. Any kind, you give them a box. That's a fine toy, you know, it's just like a lot of good ways to do this. And I think there's sort of some comfort in that message.
Yeah.
Because you're still, even if you have that message, you're still going to be like obsessing about the toys for sure.
Right.
Getting the right toys.
Today's episode is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. If you want to find out more about ZipRecruiter, you can visit ziprecruiter.com/east. The way it works is ZipRecruiter sends your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards. But they don't stop there. With their powerful matching technology, ZipRecruiter scans thousands of resumes to find people with the right experience and invites them to apply to your job. As applications come in, ZipRecruiter analyzes each one and spotlights the top candidates so you never miss a great match. ZipRecruiter is so effective that 4 out of 5 of employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. And right now, my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/east. That's ziprecruiter.com/EAST. ZipRecruiter really is the smartest way to hire. Today's episode is brought to you by Away. Away gives you first-class luggage at a coach price. And their approach is simple: to create special objects that are designed to be resilient, resourceful, and essential to the way you travel today. Away uses high-quality materials while offering a much lower price compared to other brands by cutting out the middleman and selling directly to you. You can even get free shipping on any Away order within the lower 48 states. You can choose from 9 different colors and 4 different sizes. My personal favorite is the carry-on. And some of the features that I love about Away products are that all the suitcases are made with a premium German polycarbonate, which is unrivaled in its strength and impact resistance. And the interior features a patent-pending compression system, which is helpful for you overpackers out there. There's a removable, washable laundry bag that keeps dirty clothes separate from the clean. And both sides of the carry-on are able to charge all cell phones and anything else that's powered by a USB cord. There's a lifetime warranty, so if anything breaks, they will fix it or replace it for life. And a 100-day trial, so you can live with it, vibe with it, travel with it, Instagram it, and if you want to return it, you get a full refund. If you guys want $20 off your suitcase, go to awaytravel.com/east and use promo code EAST during checkout. That's $20 off a suitcase at awaytravel.com/east. Use promo code EAST during checkout.
I got advice from a teammate of mine, Tress Way. I was like, dude, how do you be a dad? He's like, hey, as long as they're alive and breathing, you're doing a good job. but it was at a point where I was stressed out because we were getting all these opinions and like they start getting to your head and you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, like you're responsible for this person's life. Shawn and I went through the 20-week ultrasound. This was a huge learning lesson for us. But we did like the little 3D thing for the first time. And I'm sitting there looking at the spinal cord and the fingers and the face. And I'm like, God, this is amazing because all this happened. This whole thing was created and I didn't really have, like, we didn't have control over it really. Like this, you didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And then the OBGYN comes in after and she's like, hey, the results just look, they just look okay. And so Shawn had, X complication that could lead to this disorder. And then this was underdeveloped, which might be an indication for that. And like Shawn and we just broke down crying. We're like, whoa, like what the whole thing how do you do this?
Yeah.
But it seems like beyond that issue, it seems like depending on who you ask, and again, this is why I love your book, everything is okay and nothing is okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, geez, like, well, this study says, I mean, vaccines has been just.
I find this really hard to talk about. So, I say, and I talk in the book about, you should vaccinate your kid. And I actually, I think one of the issues that we have in talking across on this, in this space is that like the pro-vaccine guys, the kind of CDC government, whatever, are basically like, you should vaccinate your kid. Trust us. We're experts. We know what's the best. And then the kind of other side is like, well, why don't we look at the data? Like they almost seem more evidence-based. Like we have these studies and they show and even though like those studies are totally flawed, it ends up sort of seeming like here's this like guys with evidence. And then there's these people who are just like, oh, I'm an expert. It's like, what for what? What do you mean?
Yeah.
You're just like some old guy. And so I really spent a long time on that chapter, even though I already knew, I was kind of convinced of what the evidence was going to be. I spent a long time really going through like the details of some of these, what are there any complications for vaccines? What are they? And kind of trying to show that, look, yeah, there are a few things that can happen, but they're like very, very minor. They have no long-term consequences, like, yeah, your kid can get a fever, but like, that's okay. Like it's not, that's not dangerous. And so then I thought I would like write this and then people who would be like, oh yeah, you're totally right. Which is definitely not what happened at all. Never. And, I have had some conversations with some people who are on the other side of this. And, I don't always find these conversations to be super evidence-based. I think people are kind of pulling on like, well, here's one, here is this one study, and you're like, well, there's a problem with this. And they're like, well, here is this other study, or, people, and it's like, well, what about, I'm like, okay, well, we have the study of, almost 1 million kids in Denmark who are, who were vaccinated, and the risk of autism is lower in the vaccinated kids than the non-vaccinated kids. So like that, and that's like 1 million people, that's like, it's so many people. They're like, well, in Denmark, they give the first vaccines at 3 months instead of 2 months. So we can't really use that data. It's like, That doesn't make any sense, but like, I mean, what is even the response to that? So,
yeah. How do you go about, constructing your studies? Cause there's analysis, there's meta-analysis. How do you do what you do?
So I think there's like 2 stages. One is, I try to read everything. And in some of these, like in some cases, there's more than others. So when I study something like breastfeeding, there's like thousands of papers about the links between breastfeeding and other things. And so I try to read all of them, most of them. In some cases, I actually have like research assistants separately do literature reviews. And so I make sure that like my technique is not missing some important stuff. And then I try to use that to kind of figure out what I think is what is the truth, like what do the best studies show. And then I think that the other thing that's kind of different from the way I would do academic work. So if you were going to do an academic paper about this stuff, you just like sort of summarize everything. You'd be like, okay, there's 1,000 studies and, here's what all 1,000 of them say or whatever. In a book, you can't write about all 1,000 studies. And so I spend a lot of time sort of thinking about which of the studies are the best and also which of them sort of best illustrate some of the problems with the other ones. So I really want people to come out, understanding not just what I think the conclusion is, but why I think the data support that, and what are some of the problems in the papers that I think are more flawed. And I think that is the part that is the hardest, but also the most fun for me.
Because to a certain extent, I guess there is some trust that the audience has in you and saying, oh, well, she's deciding that this is good evidence. And I think people. I feel like people should have that trust because this is my job, and they pay me a bunch of money to like whatever do this. But I think that I've tried to have it not just be like trust me, because I think there are. When I wrote Expecting Better and I looked at the landscape, there actually were some other books, some of them written by people who were doctors that came to many of the same conclusions, but mostly they were just like, because I'm a doctor, I read papers and this is my conclusion. And so I'm trying to sort of take at least one more step and say, here is kind of why. And then by the way, in the back of the book, here is 25 pages of single space references. And if you really need to know more about this topic, go there and read the papers, and then you can sort of see what they cite, and it gives you a starting point. Very good.
So
we talked a little bit about the findings of expecting better. Can you talk about some of the surprising things in Cribsheet that you found out doing that?
So I think there aren't as many, much more, I mean, you sort of alluded to this, but like much more of Cribsheet is like sort of, yes, there are a lot of good parenting choices and like you need to figure out what works for you. And so I think there aren't as many things where it's like, aha, like people tell you this and here's this other thing that is the truth. I think one that a lot of people find surprising, although it's like kind of in the weeds, is this stuff about peanut allergies. So peanut allergy is like a huge thing now. A lot of people have them. It turns out that exposing your kids to peanuts when they're very little, like at 4 months, is really good at preventing development of allergies. And that's probably true for things other than peanuts, but it's certainly true for peanuts. And so there's kind of a big shift from what you used to be told, like don't introduce peanuts until kids are like 1 or 2, and now people are like, give them peanuts right away, like as soon as they're, born, slathering on them. And so I think that was something that a lot of people find surprising. And it's kind of one of the few things in the book where it's like, this is something you should definitely do. Because it's not hard to do. And there's no like reason that you would not do it, except that you didn't know about it.
Yeah. Was there any controversy or pushback from Cribsheet?
I think the one place I got a little bit, although way less than expecting better, is about breastfeeding. So, I think that the kind of rhetoric, you're probably already getting this, but like the rhetoric around breastfeeding is sort of like breast milk is liquid gold. It's, this is the best way to give your kid the best start. And I think that what I kind of say in Cribsheet is like, yeah, like breastfeeding is great. And there is a sense in which like it is best in the sense that there are some benefits to your kid, particularly around kind of early health, but that a lot of these more grandiose claims, like it's going to make your kid smarter or thinner or healthy when they're older, like those things are not supported in the data. And some people didn't like that. A few people.
Yeah. Is it true that from a mother's perspective, just the caloric burn is like compelling? No.
I mean, it does burn calories. It burns calories. No, it burns calories. It's just that like the claim that it helps you lose weight, like when you look at like the differences in weight loss between men who breastfeed and women who don't, it's like, like a difference of like a half a pound or a pound.
No.
Yeah, because you eat
more.
You
just rocked my world.
Because you eat more. You nurse, you lose calories, but you eat more because you're hungry.
Oh yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard you talk about that. I was like, I have to ask about the caloric burn. Like, God.
Yeah.
Really?
In fact, a lot of women, I mean, in an anecdotal sense, a lot of women say they have a very hard time losing the last of the baby weight until they stop nursing because your body's like holding on to some, fat so they can make the milk.
Yeah. So I guess as an athlete, there's, been talk, people have asked me, are you going to drink Shawn's breast milk? And I thought they were joking at first. But apparently you can buy it on the black market, breast milk in general. And so they're like, if your wife, hey.
And that's going to help your performance?
Because apparently it's so nutrient dense. Are we going to cut this part of the show? Should I? I'm not kidding.
No, that's amazing.
I haven't drank. Okay.
That's amazing. Yeah. It's very sweet.
I haven't tried it. So
yeah, well,
I guess now I don't have a reason to, but I was kind of excited.
You gotta try it to see what it tastes like.
Okay. Wow. Huh. Good to know. This is somewhat related to the peanut allergy, but it's slightly different. Can you tell me about gluten allergies and celiac and the whole thing? Is there any way? Is that strictly genetic? Is it?
I don't think we know that. I mean, celiac disease is, so first of all, there's like many different versions of this. So celiac, like true kind of celiac disease, which is actually not that common, does have a genetic component. Wheat is a common allergy. So wheat allergy and celiac are not the same thing. Wheat is a common allergy, and same kind of principle as peanuts, that early exposure seems like it is. I think this is more speculative, but I think generally we think that early exposure to wheat lowers the risk of developing a wheat allergy, which again is sort of different from a gluten sensitivity, which is also itself different from celiac.
Okay. Great.
Are you a celiac?
I'm not. No. Shawn will fleece me for putting this out there, but she says she's gluten sensitive, and I'm like, I think unless you're celiac, we shouldn't be paying a premium for all this,
gluten-free food.
But I have my
a lot
bias.
of people do think they have a gluten sensitivity.
What about, this is my last just tangent question, but what about lactose intolerance, dairy products?
So a lot of people develop, so lactose intolerance obviously has genetic component, because there are like whole populations with very high rates of lactose intolerance. And most adults, if you stop drinking milk, if you stopped consuming lactose, you would develop some intolerance. Like, we're not really designed to, it's like, like mammals, most mammals do not continue to drink milk as they grow. Right.
Gotcha.
So most people are, at risk for a lactose intolerance, but, given your demographic picture, your kid probably won't be lactose intolerant. But again, same thing about milk, like early exposure to milk, like in the form of cheese, can make kids more tolerant. Not all kids like milk. My kids don't like, one of my kids likes milk. The other one doesn't.
So interesting. Because it's important, and I want people to get another snapshot of your work. We talked about the breast milk. You separate what the data does support and the benefits of it by caveating it with the demographics of the people who typically breastfeed. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so this is probably the biggest challenge to this area of research, is that basically the women who breastfeed, particularly in the US, particularly now, are very different than women who do not. So breastfeeding is much more common among high educated, rich, white, kind of like upper middle class women in their 30s than among other groups. And those characteristics, particularly things like education and income, are associated in the data with better outcomes, like better test scores. And that's for a lot of different reasons. We can talk about that on a different show. But that means it's very hard to know, is it the breastfeeding or is it this other stuff? And so I think the best studies of this are ones that are able to really kind of carefully adjust for differences across women, or to actually like compare siblings. So I think many of the best studies of this look at like two siblings, one of whom is breastfed and one of whom is not, and look at things like, did they have different test scores later? And that way you're kind of holding constant like who the mom is, and that helps with a lot of those problems.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so how old is your oldest?
My oldest is 8 and my younger one is 4.
So the book was written.
Well, the first book was written when my daughter was a baby. My older one is a baby. The second book was kind of written when my son was like kind of just aging out of it, when he was like 2. So, have you learned any new insights since being through the whole cycle now? I learned, one of the things I've learned is that older kids are harder. So, in the moment of having a baby, you're just like, nothing could be harder than this, because you're so tired. Right. And it is true that it is very hard to have a baby and you will be very tired. But as your kids get bigger, like the kinds of problems that they have and the issues like seem so much more, they just seem harder, and partly because your kid like has their own opinions, and kind of how do I like raise a competent adult, is a much different question than like, kind of should I swaddle or not, which is like important and something you should, decide about, but is also like a very small, minute thing, not like, how can I get my kid to like be socially integrated? So that's another thing that I was alerted of going through this, is like, at first you don't want kids, like when you're, in high school, but then you go through a phase of like, hey, we're trying to get pregnant. And so there's this hope of like, hey, we might be pregnant. Hope it sticks. That whole thing. Yes. Shawn and I experienced a miscarriage. So then this is our second go around. You're just like, is this going to stick around? And then, not that we're out of that, but it's like developmentally wise, like, are they going to have all the things that they need physically? You know what I'm saying? Like, do they have 20 toes or 28 or 10 toes? Right? Is that how many toes? Yeah, 10 toes. 10 is the right number. Yeah, that's what we're going for. I guess looking, when I'm in this phase now, I'm like looking at you mentioning the more complex problems of differences in kids. I'm like, God, I just hope that my kid gets to that point. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. No, it is. I mean, and I think it's like, every kind of moment with your kid sort of feels like like you're sort of looking at these later things and it's like, well, like that'll be great when we're doing that. And I, like in some ways it just gets like easier and better and more fun, but it's also like, it's sort of stressful in different ways.
Yeah. I'm realizing the stress is part of the job title now.
Yep. Exactly.
What do you think is the best way to have conversations around this sensitive subject of parenting? Like, is there any advice that you have of that?
I think the only advice I would have is sort of from my personal approach to this. So like, I am like naturally a tremendously bossy person.
Okay.
And now I'm like a bossy person who has written these books on pregnancy. Right. So I'm like,
right.
So I'm my instincts when people are like, well, like people ask me questions, my instincts are to be like, well, here's what you do. Let me give you like the checklist for, and I actually found myself, particularly in the wake of the book, really fighting that and just being like, well, I can tell you what worked, I can tell you what I did, but it's not obviously the right thing for you. And I think if we could have a little bit more of that tone, it's sometimes easy to morph from like advice into like sort of bossy judgment, or to have people hear it that way, even if that is not the way you mean it. And that's different than just like, you shouldn't post on people's Instagram about how like they're being a shitty parent. Like that's not, you shouldn't do that.
It's just
not effective. They're not listening to you. But even if it's sort of well-meaning, there's a kind of tone that sometimes I think comes across wrong that we could be a little more careful about.
Very interesting. Well said. And good self-awareness. So I thought this whole topic would be applicable to the show because I feel like for a lot of people, having kids is a pivotal moment, obviously in life, but also oftentimes with kids. I was watching this National Geographic, it's called Geniuses series. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's good. And I think in both the Picasso and Einstein, there's this mention of the tension of you can't have a successful career and be committed to your family. Do you think that's still relevant in this day and age? Have you personally struggled with that?
I don't think that that's true. I think you can have a successful career and have a family. I think that it is, I think that there are challenges that come with trying to do two things well. And it is I frequently feel I'm doing both things poorly, basically. I think some of it is like sort of some of what I try to do is recognize that like this is like a moment, like my kids are pretty little and they need like a lot. They need a lot. And sort of thinking about your successful career as kind of like being your whole, there's many years of time for your job, which are maybe some of which will overlap and some of which will not. And so I think part of what's hard is that often the times when your career is like, this is both an age when you're likely to be having little kids and an age in which many people are kind of making a lot of professional investments, and it's hard to balance. And I think maybe just recognizing that like most of the time you're going to feel like you're not doing a good job balancing, but like everyone else also thinks that that can be kind of helpful.
Okay.
Not that they think you're doing a bad job, but that they think they're doing a bad
job. Okay, 3 more questions and then I'll let you off. So aside from the parenting work that you've done and that research, what other projects are you excited about or have you been excited about in the past?
So I'm pretty excited about the thing I'm doing now, which is about trying to understand why so much of the research that we do around like these public health, kind of like people's health behaviors, why so much of it is so flawed. So trying to think about like, when you tell people to take vitamins, the kinds of people who take vitamins are different from the ones who don't. Like the people who listen to that advice tend to be, high education, rich people. And that means that like once you tell people to take vitamins, then your data is going to make it look like vitamins are good for you because the people who are taking the vitamins are kind of doing other good things, and that makes it really hard to learn about this. So that's like something I'm doing now that I've wanted to do for a long time that I'm excited about.
So it's like Inception and data analysis. Like, well, how many levels?
We're like in the.
That's crazy. Okay, so I always ask this, and I leave it open-ended intentionally. But what are your goals now?
I mean, I feel like I am and it's a good time to talk to you, I guess. I feel like I am at a little bit of a pivot in terms of what I do next. This book, the second book was pretty successful, and I think now I could write another book. But I can't decide if I want to or not. And I'm doing a lot of my regular research at my job, but I'm also doing a lot of administration stuff in my university, and I'm sort of trying to figure out which of these paths I want to take. I'm almost 40, and so I don't know. I feel like maybe I should pick a lane. I don't know.
How are you going to go about making that decision?
I don't know. I don't know. I haven't. I don't know. I feel like this is kind of one of the first times that I've made a really tried to think really intentionally about that kind of choice. But I'm not sure I have a great framework for how to do it.
Yeah. That's so I started this show because I play football professionally, and it's I like it, but I also have so many other things that I'm excited about. And some way, football is easier in some senses, and there's security there, but then also there's so many positives to the other stuff. And it's what is the framework for making huge life decisions?
Yeah. And there's no manual for that.
Exactly. And I feel like you are either in decision-making phase of life, or dealing with those decisions and the consequences of those decisions. And you kind of want to stay away from just saturating yourself and marinating in those consequences, and try to keep making decisions and being okay with that. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I do.
So that's
right.
Kind of what I've gleaned. So, last question: 3 takeaways that you've learned personally over your life or in your research that could apply to the audience as a whole.
So, I think when I wrote the first book, a lot of not good stuff happened career-wise as a result. But then it all turned out really great. Which was good. And I sort of wish that I had a little more perspective at the time. And so to sort of look 2 years down the road and realize things were going to be okay. Then I'm sure that's really a piece of wisdom. But okay. I think the other thing I will say about parenting is I think I try very hard to be really open about the way that I parent and about my desire to be a good parent in other settings, particularly at my job. And I think being willing to say, I am going to make a different professional choice because I care about being with my kids at this stage. I think that's something that I wish people would feel like they could do. And I think the other thing, which is also about my kids, because I think about them a lot, is that you can't always make your kids the thing that you want them to be, which I find a hard lesson to learn.
Wow. Thank you for taking the time to be on the show, Emily. Thank you for all the work that you've done and the books that you've written. They have left a positive impact on my life, and I know many others. So if you guys haven't checked out Emily's work, Expecting Better and Cribsheet, you can find them on
Amazon. Mostly is where I sell things, on Amazon. Amazon.
Check her out. But thank you. It's great meeting you and great chatting.
Thanks, Andrew. It was great to talk to you.
If you haven't yet, please make sure that you subscribe to the podcast and leave a review if you feel called to. It really helps the show out. And I love having a new audience. I love hearing what you guys think. And I love having you come back every single week.